Starting this bulletin with some breaking news, Russia's defense ministry today said that some forces deployed near Ukraine have begun returning to their bases after having completed their tasks. These units belong to southern and western military districts, according to reports carried by Russian news agencies. These developments come after Russia seemingly opened a door on Monday to a diplomatic resolution to the Ukraine standoff. The change in tone was displayed in a carefully choreographed meeting between President Putin and his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov. This was their televised address.
Безопасностью в Европе и ответа на наши озабоченности, связанные с решением по поводу реакции на полученные ответы.
Привлекая их внимание к тому, что обязательства по недельности безопасности гораздо там же содержатся конкретные предложения по целому ряду мер снижения военных.
Putin asks Lavrov if there was a chance of reaching an agreement with the West. Lavrov suggested continuing with dialogue. Putin says fine, giving his assent from the other end of an extremely long table. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Putin was willing to hold talks on security guarantees and also willing to negotiate. As speculation mounts, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is due in Moscow today for talks with Putin. This is the latest such visit by European leaders aimed at avoiding a fully blown conflict. Ahead of his trip to Moscow, Scholz visited Kyiv on Monday and vowed that Berlin and its Western allies would maintain support for Ukraine's security and independence, urging Russia to take up offers of dialogue. But Berlin's close business relations with Moscow and heavy reliance on Russian natural gas imports have been a source of lingering concern. Let's talk more about that. WION correspondent Trent Murray is joining us live from Berlin. Thank you for your time and welcome to this broadcast. Trent, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is headed to Russia from Kyiv. Does his diplomacy effort look promising?
Well, that is certainly the ambition of the German Chancellor and the German government. In their words, they are trying to avert a war in Europe. And so that is why we are seeing this whistle-stop tour of diplomacy led by Chancellor Scholz, as you mentioned, spending much of the day yesterday in Kiev. In many ways, though, today is probably the main event as he goes to Moscow to try and pull President Putin back from the brink of any possible conflict. We, of course, know that Germany, as part of NATO, has been working incredibly hard to try and prevent any sort of conflict erupting, but also trying to make it clear that if there is an incursion of the Ukrainian border, that there will be a strong and very tough response on the Kremlin. Now, we understand that today, as part of those meetings with President Putin, Chancellor Scholz will be coming with some numbers, if you will, wanting to make it very clear what the economic cost will be, spelling it out quite plainly. Also, some discussions over that controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which will pump gas directly from Russia into Germany, a very lucrative project for the coffers of the Kremlin. But Berlin has been under a lot of pressure to make it clear to Vladimir Putin that if an attack takes place, that pipeline will not open. Whether Olaf Scholz gives that message or not, we have to wait and see, but it will be a very high-stakes summit between the two leaders.
Trent, India is the latest country to join more than a dozen other countries, including Germany, to ask their citizens to leave Ukraine. What prompted Germany to take such an action, and yet its leader travelled to Ukraine?
Yeah, it is an alarming development, isn't it? More and more countries lining up to tell their citizens that if they're in Ukraine, it's time to get out. Of course, Germany joining the UK, the US, Israel, Australia, the list is getting very, very longer. I think much of this is being driven by intelligence, both out of the Pentagon in the US and also out of London, signalling that an attack could take place at any moment. I mean, the language we are hearing from Washington and London, and especially in all of this, is just extraordinary, saying things like an attack could be imminent. Of course, the US embassy also essentially closing up shop shop in Kiev and moving to the west of the country. I think it's against that backdrop, though, that Olaf Scholz and other European representatives will continue to go to the region to try and defuse these tensions. But it does come as other warnings start to emerge across Europe. The latest is a suggestion that there could be some cyber attacks possibly on the way, a wave of cyber attacks on NATO countries. Again, that suggestion coming out of both US and British intelligence. So this has got many, many European capitals quite nervous, which is why I think this meeting today between Olaf Scholz and President Putin will be watched by many, many people to see if we can try and find a way to just bring the temperature down in all of this.
Finally, Trent, several countries have threatened sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine. What impact would sanctions on Russia pose on the economy of countries in the European bloc?
Yeah, well, that is, it's a good question, because much of the discussion has been centred around the type of economic damage it could do to Russia. But of course, Russia, in reverse, does do a lot of business with European countries, including right here in Germany. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, has said that the EU values its relationship with Russia, its trading relationship, but Russia values it and needs it more. In other words, yes, Europe would have to take a bit of an economic hit in all of this as well, but it would impact Russia a lot more. One area of particular noteworthiness is energy, gas. Europe relies a lot on Russian gas essentially to keep the lights on, especially over winter. About 40% of its gas needs come from Russia. We understand the European Union has been stepping up conversations with countries like Qatar and Norway to try and see if they will be available to help provide additional supplies to help fill that gap if there is some sort of disruption from Russia.
Live from Berlin, Germany, Trent Murray, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us today. Vladislav Davidson is an international affairs expert and is now joining us live from Kyiv. Davidson, thank you very much for your time and welcome to WION. What's your opinion about nations panicking and recalling their citizens from Ukraine and Belarus?
Hi, it's great to be here and it's great to have a chance to speak to Indians. It's wonderful, in fact. I'm an American. I'm a dual national. I'm an American. I'm also from here. I don't love that the American embassy did this. They packed up shop and actually destroyed documents and blew up the sensitive comms equipment and took the embassy staff to Lviv, to the other side of a border, to the Polish border. I do not love, as I've already said, the alarmism. I don't love the way that the Biden administration has been playing this. I wrote an op-ed about this the other day in an American newspaper. I think it's having adverse effects on this country. I think it is creating an unnecessary sense of panic, which is not being felt by the majority of the population here, by the way. Right. I think it is a part of a scale of operations, disinfo, and the rest of it, illusions, and the kind of disinformation that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has become famous for. So I think it has had great effects in some ways in that it has created cohesion. It has scared the allies of Ukraine, the Europeans, into taking measures. It has gotten them a lot more weapons, especially from the British. On the other hand, you now have a basically de facto air blockade of the country as more and more airlines stop flying here. People are fleeing. It's creating economic costs. Obviously, there are good things about taking a situation seriously. There are obviously bad things about alarmism.
All right. Military drills and troops deployment are still ongoing, despite Russia denying any plans of invading Ukraine. Then what is Russia preparing for with all the border exercises?
Look, the Kremlin is interested in putting pressure on Kiev to settle on its terms. The Russians are interested in getting this situation resolved. Putin has become very frustrated. Nothing that he does in order to tinker with the Ukrainian political project, in order to continue the Russian domination of Ukraine, has been working. War has not worked. Ratcheting up war in the East has not worked. Financing and controlling a fifth column of pro-Russian parliamentarians has not worked. Waiting the situation out for a new president has not worked. In the long arc of the presidency of Vladimir Putin, my namesake, Vlad, he wants to get the situation resolved now, and he probably does not see in the long arc of his presidency a better moment.
Right.
So is he going to invade? No one except him knows, but he certainly wants to get as much of a concessions that he thinks he can get out now.
Chancellor Olaf Scholz visits Kyiv and Moscow. France also did the same, shuttle diplomacy. President Putin says he is open to dialogue. Is diplomacy the way out for this crisis, and will it work?
I mean, certainly, as someone who has family and friends here and cares very much about Kiev and the people here, and also has roots in Russia and cares about Russians, of course, diplomacy is the only way out. There's no way out through war, and the disparity in strength, especially Navy, rocket capacity, ballistic rockets, and the Air Force between the Russians and Ukrainians is, there's nothing to talk about. If the Russians wanted to flatten this country from the air tomorrow, they could do that. They cannot occupy this country, and there are lots of people with guns here who will fight them to the last man, and they know that very well. They cannot solve the situation using ground military force, and the 130,000 or 140,000 now men that they have on the border is not enough to occupy a country of 40 million people, which has 800,000 up to 1 million men under arms, and women also, who are going to fight them. They have enough troops to take Kiev, but only Kiev, or Mariupol, or Kharkiv, or Odessa, but they do not have enough troops to occupy large swaths of this country.
Right.
The war will be brutal, it will be vicious, it will be destructive. I pray to whatever gods that anyone believes in that this does not happen. I really hope this does not happen, but they're so far apart now between what Putin expects and what the Ukrainians are capable and interested in offering, that it's a very rough road in terms of diplomacy.
The U.S. has called out China for purportedly backing Moscow in the high-stakes Ukrainian standoff. What role does China play in this matter?
I think one of the most interesting things about this situation is seeing how many BGTs, the battle group battalions, the Russians have taken off the border with China in the Far East. As far as Vladivostok and Vladikavkaz and Manchuria, the Russian troops have poured in to the border with Ukraine and to Belarus. Some of them traveling as much as 2-3 weeks to get here. That's a really long time. It takes 2 weeks to take a train from that part of the Chinese border to here. 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks to bring military equipment. The fact that the Russians are that comfortable leaving their rear exposed to the Chinese and potential Chinese invasion means that they're very comfortable with their Chinese partners in this situation.
Right.
And they are de facto allies against the West. Sadly, I wish this was not true, but I think the only thing that the Chinese asked was that this not happen in a way that gets in the way of the spectacle of their long-planned Olympic Games.
International affairs expert, Mr. Vladislav Davidzon, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to WION today.
Thank you for having me so much. It's been great.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.